So let me just tell you who I am
Yeah,
first, and then
please.
I'll go to the question.
Absolutely.
How's
Go
that?
ahead.
All right. Look, I'm Wade Henderson. I'm the former president of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. I'm currently the Joseph L. Rao Jr. Professor of Public Interest Law at the David A. Clark School of Law, the University of the District of Columbia. About a year ago, I stepped down as the head of the Leadership Conference, and now I spend my time working with a wonderful organization called the Center for Responsible Lending. As I look back over the 50 years of the Minority Student Program, I'm reminded about how much our country has changed. When I decided to come to Rutgers in 1970, I had previously been a student at Howard University, the citadel of historically black colleges and universities here in the United States. And I had been exposed to so much in the way of intellectual development and political development. It was an experience that could not really be replicated and is difficult to describe. But one thing it captured for me is the beauty that can be brought about through change. For me, the 60s were a period of extraordinary change. I grew up in Washington, D.C. with one foot in a segregated world. And I lived to be a part of the change that I had always hoped to see come to our country. And as that change was taking place, I began to see how law could be used both as a sword for social change and also a shield to protect against discrimination. And I wanted to pursue a career in social change, pursuing social justice. In 1967, I had gone to a Supreme Court argument, could not get in, but I was outside protesting at the case of Adam Clayton Powell, one of the great political leaders here in the United States, and arguably the most powerful African American in Congress at that time. Powell had been expelled from the House of Representatives for reasons that were totally insubstantial. But it turns out that he was represented at the Supreme Court by three extraordinary individuals. One was Professor Arthur Kanoy, who taught here at Rutgers Law School. The other was Herbert O. Reed, a constitutional law professor at Howard, whom I had gone down to support because we knew Professor Reed and knew what a champion for justice he was. And the third was Jean Camper Kahn, the first African-American woman lawyer I had gotten to see, and along with her husband, Edgar Kahn, helped to set up the Legal Services Program here in the United States. After their argument, Arthur came to Howard University's campus to speak, and I was mesmerized. He was such a powerful orator, such a visionary who wanted to talk about what the law could be as a tool for social change. And I just knew that wherever he taught, I wanted to go as well. But 3 years later, when I applied to law school, I was a little late. And I was trying to make a decision whether to go into law or to go into graduate school at Columbia. And I had the pleasure of talking with Professor Alfred Slocum. It was Alfred Slocum who, in the interview we did by telephone, inspired me to apply to Rutgers and inspired me to pursue the career I've chosen in the course of my work. And it was Rutgers that, gave me the tools to do that. My inspiration to do what I do came from my early years and my parents, my family, and my experiences at Howard. But the tools for social change and the vision about how to use those tools came from Rutgers. And it's because of that grounding that I had that I've been able to pursue a career in social change as part of what I bring to the profession. Slocum, by anyone who knows him, creates an incredible impression when you first speak with him. He was abrupt. He was a little challenging in terms of his perspective. He asked me why I wanted to go to law school, and if the response I gave didn't seem to measure up, he pursued it even further. I found Alfred Slocum to be one of the great intellects of my experiences in the law, and it was Al's penetrating inquiry about my interest in law and why I thought that Rutgers would be the place for me that really brought to full fruition why it was important for me to come here. So it really was an inspiration. He told me that I would find some of the best and most challenging faculty members I could possibly find in law school, and he talked about the setting that Newark provided for this extraordinary program that he advised me about. I mean, keep in mind that Rutgers was a regional law school that was inspired to make a commitment for social change based on the rebellion of 1967. It was the Newark Rebellion in '67, brought about by a combination of poverty, police brutality and racism, and the frustration born by dreams deferred, expectations that were made but never fulfilled. And that combination created an environment that nurtured the growth of an institution that was committed to social change. Add to that an extraordinary faculty, some of the brightest and best that I certainly had ever met. In addition to Arthur Conoy, there was Frank Askin, there was Paul Trachtenberg, there was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, from whom I took a course in conflict of laws. I mean, these were some of the seminal intellects of our era, and I have to say, inspired me to pursue my studies in the law and to pursue a career in social change. And it was Alfred's introduction to Rutgers that told me I had chosen well. When I came to Newark, my initial reaction was dismay. I had lived a relatively cloistered life in Washington. Even though I had gone to Howard, I had not traveled a great deal. And so when I came to Newark to go to law school, it was really my first experience outside of Washington, outside of the South. Newark was still reeling from the rebellion of '67, even though it had been 3 years earlier. When I stepped off the train and came to the law school, you could still smell the char in the air from the city that had burned. And I looked around, and I have to say I was depressed by the physical conditions of the city. And I said, my God, I'm going to spend 3 years here. But I came to the law school, and there was a level of excitement that seemed to affect all of the students, and that excitement and enthusiasm was contagious. I met young people like myself, some from communities north, some in the south, but all who brought with them a passion for social change. And that passion, I thought, was infectious. You know, it was something that I wanted to be a part of. And they were embracing, and they were warm, and they were encouraging, and they were nurturing. And I would also say the city itself responded in a similar way. I call Newark a city of hidden beauty, because in spite of the rough exterior, I found the people to be warm and committed and embracing, welcoming. And I'm referring now not just to the student body, I'm talking about the people in the city of Newark. Newark was a place that I found myself and my calling, because the need was so great. The people who were here as citizens were so genuine and so committed to improving the conditions in which they lived that I wanted to be a part of that change. And I found it to be very satisfying. The minority student program at Rutgers is incredibly unique. It was born out of the struggles of this community, and it was developed in response to what professors and faculty here at the law school felt was its obligation to respond to the legitimate needs of the people who lived here. Rutgers decided that it wanted to be a part of the change that was taking place all around. And by initiating this program, Rutgers really helped launch what was taking place not just here but around the country as the Second American Reconstruction. This was the period that came about at the end of the 1960s, when major civil rights initiatives had been enacted and were now being implemented into law. And Rutgers wanted to accelerate that. And, you know, I learned early on that, look, there are victories that will occur in the work that you do, but that there is no lasting promise for change. Vigilance is required. One has to pursue this, you know, on a regular basis. And so while some of the victories that happened while we were in school were important, they were not necessarily permanent. you don't have permanent victories. You have enduring values. And the values of the people who were here are what inspired me to pursue a career in civil and human rights. I felt that Rutgers was the perfect incubator, if you will, for creating an understanding of how the law could be used for social change. And so whether it was the great Anna Mae Shepherd with the Urban Legal Institute that was set up here, or Frank Askin with the Constitutional Law Clinic, I felt that Rutgers was being responsive to the needs of the poor, to the needs of people who were downtrodden, and it really taught me that you could use law both as a sword for change to challenge those who would oppress their fellow citizens, and also use it as a shield of protection against the kind of discrimination that we had seen throughout society. Rutgers also taught me to think systemically. You know, you can have a challenge to a particular condition, which is often driven by facts, but Rutgers taught me to take the long view, that the struggle for social justice in this country is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you have an obligation, you make a commitment, you pursue those changes, and then you hand off the baton to another generation of leadership. And throughout the history of this program, you've seen that emergence of new leaders with every graduating class. And to be a part of that, to have profited, if you will, from my experience here, and to be able to convert that into a career that I've loved, is something for which I'll forever be grateful. Rutgers was the minority student program indeed was a brand new program. And keep in mind that Rutgers, as a law school, prior to the start of the minority student program in 1968, was largely white and male. Rutgers introduced the concept of diversity into the law. And it did so with the understanding that it would be an agent for change, both in New Jersey and nationally. And if you look at its graduates and what we have done individually and collectively, this law school has more than fulfilled its mission, And so the notion of introducing a diverse set of players in the law, people who brought different perspectives on the nature of the issues, the challenges of the day, how one goes about dismantling systemic discrimination, the interaction between people of different backgrounds was something that stimulated my personal growth and stimulated, in my view, the growth of this law school for the better. It did. I mean, I had a real commitment when I came here to using the law as a tool for change. I mean, I had witnessed the 1960s. I had been attracted to some of the real outliers of the time, the Black Panther Party, the Southern Democratic Party that challenged the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Those kinds of activities I found appealing because they reflected a level of direct action that I thought was necessary to bring about change. But I also recognized that some of the individuals who were most aggressive in pursuing change in this way were on the fringes of our body politic, were often not just excluded, but were actually in some instances jailed, or they were not able to really get their views incorporated into the mainstream. And we needed to have a different path in order to bring about change and to survive the effort that we were pursuing. I thought that law was the perfect vehicle for that. I looked around at Congress, I looked around at state legislatures, and I recognized that lawyers were often the bulk of the decision makers who made judgments about, the kinds of lives that we lived, whether it was in the courts, whether it was in Congress, even in the executive branch of government. And I felt that there was a utility that a law degree provided. If you knew how to use it, it could be the key to unlock significant areas of change and for the better. And so that's what I had really hoped to do. And I felt that Rutgers nurtured that worldview because of the setting that we were in and because of the law school's faculty's commitment to using its skills and the opportunity that the law school provided to bring about significant change both at the national level and locally. And so even though, for example, the Supreme Court decision in Gideon versus Wainwright was decided, I believe, in 1963, Rutgers was sort of pursuing a version of civil Gideon long before it became fashionable to talk about it. Our law professors were offering services and assistance in the local courtrooms, in the legal services programs, in housing clinics. They were bringing their skills directly to the people who were affected by many of the problems that we studied. And Rutgers was ahead of its time in introducing clinical legal education, or reintroducing clinical legal education back into the curriculum of America's law schools. But it was one of the first of the major institutions to devote such a substantial portion of its curricular development to clinics. So this law school was on the cutting edge. And I felt that by going to Rutgers, I had an advantage that many of my fellow law students never experienced. And again, I attribute that much to those who taught courses here, the faculty. And again, I speak not just fondly of Al Slocum or Kanoy or others. I mean, this law school was loaded with faculty who were strong and who were committed to bringing their students the best and broadest view of how to use the law as a tool. I think MSP graduates have done this law school, this institution, proud. I think when you look at what we have done as graduates, whether it was serving on the House Judiciary Committee during the Nixon impeachment, to working as clerks both in the state courts and in the federal court system, in looking at serving as police chiefs in major communities around the country, as well as, populating the bench and bar with a very diverse array of expertise. This law school has produced an extraordinary array of graduates, and those graduates have, I think, taken the values that were instilled in us as students at Rutgers, and we have been able to use those values and that training to really bring about systemic, lasting change. And that, to me, is really what a law school is all about. You want to be able to look back on your career and recognize that you were not simply instructing the next generation of lawyers, but you were also giving them, helping to develop their values and their views about what the law really represented and how to use those experiences and those skills to really bring about the lasting change that we want. Oh, I think this 50th anniversary is such an important testament to the value of the MSP program and to the investment that both the law school and the state have made in building a more diverse bench and bar. And I think that we recognize that this was a temporary program that became what appears to be a permanent addition to the law school because of its incredible success. And I think that in looking at what the law school was able to accomplish, it has to be proud that it was able to take students from this very diverse set of backgrounds and meld them into a cohesive entity that shared a set of values that reflect the best of what this institution is all about. And when you look at how MSP graduates have affected the profession, have actually practiced law and shaped the law that we are dealing with today, you have to be incredibly proud, because not every institution that calls itself a law school can really make that statement. I think Rutgers is unique in that regard. And we earned the name the People's Electric Law School because that's, in effect, what we symbolized at the time that the program was really getting underway, and we continue to symbolize that today. I'll have to say one thing about what it did for me. I'm on social media. I know several of our alumni are, and I'm on Twitter. And my Twitter handle is Wade for Justice. And that handle came about, yes, the values that I learned as a young man helped instill the direction that I wanted to go in, but the meaning of justice, I learned here at Rutgers. And I embrace it because to me it is what my career has been about and what I hope this law school instills in every one of its graduates. Well, first of all, I think MSP recognizes that a diverse bench and bar is in the interests of the state of New Jersey, but also the nation as a whole, and that law schools have been far too restrictive in terms of their admissions policies and how they have examined and determined who would be the best students to be lawyers. Now, we all believe that there should be a criteria for determining admissions, and those criteria are very important. But Rutgers encouraged a broadening of the examination process, of determining who would flourish in this atmosphere. And that was, I think, a significant contribution to the profession as a whole. Secondly, I think Rutgers, through its admissions process, helped to look for students, yes, who could perform in any area of the law, and that is, of course, what you want. You want lawyers who are well-rounded, who can use their skills in almost any area, and that is clearly an important contribution. But you also want lawyers who see themselves as warriors who are addressing some of the most intractable problems of our time. And you want lawyers who are immersed in the passion of their moment. You want them to be so committed to bringing about change that regardless of the area of law that they pursue, their commitment to using law as a tool for social change and social justice is inherently a part of who they are. So whether they're working in law firms, whether they're working on the federal bench, whether they're working in legal services or the public defender's office, they share a common spirit. It's offended by a sense that our country, which is so great, the world's greatest constitutional democracy, does not live up to its ideals. We are committed to building an America as good as its ideals, and you do that by using the law in creative ways as a tool for change. That's what I learned here at Rutgers. And you can approach issues in a rather conventional way, but it's important if you're going to be a lawyer, as Arthur Conoy used to refer to them, as a people's lawyer. You want to be able to ingratiate yourself in the total circumstances of what you're trying to do. Yes, you have to have your skills. Yes, you have to know how to use facts effectively. Yes, you have to be able to make an argument. We got that. But you also have to be able to interact with the clients you represent. You have to understand the communities which you are trying to serve with your skills. You have to be able to interact with people from different class structures. You have to be able to run with the foxes, and you have to be able to run with the hounds. And if you can do both, that's what makes you a people's lawyer. So, I learned that at Rutgers, and I felt that that was a skill that certainly served me well in the course of my career.
I want to talk about
I think it's important that we acknowledge the accomplishments that we and that those who came before us have accomplished. And we need to acknowledge those. But you don't need to rest on them entirely. Look, let me say, growing up in a racially segregated world, by law and by custom, was offensive to me. It was offensive to me as an American citizen. And I always felt incomplete because of the duality of what American citizenship represented. On the one hand, you embraced the highest ideals of democracy. On the other hand, you lived a reality that showed that in many instances, those commitments to these high ideals were hollow. Our job was to reconcile, on the one hand, the promise of America with, on the other, the reality of what America provided. And that's why I said that we're committed to building an America as good as its ideals. We have accomplished a great deal, and when you look back at the 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, up through the 90s, we have enacted a series of civil and human rights laws and statutes and executive actions that have changed the face of America for the better. Now, having said that, there are still problems of significant magnitude, and there are second-generation civil rights problems that continue to bedevil our country. We are celebrating this year, along with the 50th anniversary of MSP, the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, the 30th anniversary of the Fair Housing Amendments of 1988, which I had a chance to work on as a lawyer. And it has made a significant down payment on improving the quality of housing stock in our country and opportunities for housing that our country provides. But having said that, have we been able to dismantle the systemic discrimination that was created both by the federal government and the state government, which is reflected in the housing discrimination that exists in places like Newark and in other communities in New Jersey, that affect the quality of public education that we offer our students, because your zip code often determines the quality of your education and whether you are providing the resources through property tax to pay for adequate funding for schools? You know, have we resolved the criminal justice, disparities that exist in our country? No, we haven't. They are extremely pernicious, and they continue to reflect the worst of what the American system can produce. And there are 4 or 5 areas of magnitude that we have only begun to dent. We have a huge problem with the quality of public education in this community and nationwide. A huge problem, and we haven't been able to fully resolve it, even though we know the answers to that problem. We haven't been able to protect voting rights for everyone in this country who we believe as a citizen is entitled to vote. I worked on the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act in 2006. It was one of the pinnacles of my career, and I thought that we would see voting rights protected and advanced. And instead, we had a regressive Supreme Court that issued a decision that cut a hole in the heart of the Voting Rights Act, and we continue to struggle to restore the Act's vitality. We have men and women who are American citizens, but who are denied the right to vote because they are formerly incarcerated felons. And even though they are living among us, they don't have the rights and privileges that we take for granted, and therefore they are in a netherworld of inequality from which they will never escape. Never. We have an employment system that allows us to somehow feel joyous because the minority unemployment rate has declined. It's still twice as high as the rate for majority members of our society. Yet that unemployment rate reflects the kind of class and education divisions and racial bias that continues to affect the way we operate. Even areas where we are trying to apply principles of redistricting in an effective way, which is based on the census count. We're struggling now to get an accurate census count for 2020, our next big census. And yet, we have individuals who are purposefully manipulating the process to produce a skewed result that in turn will produce skewed electoral districts that are based on census data. We have many, many struggles that prevent us from proclaiming a new level of equality in American life. But I am optimistic. I'm very optimistic that we will get there, because in my own lifetime, I have seen change that I thought would never come. And yet I've been a part of helping to bring that about. Think about it. We've had the first African-American president less than 50 years after this program began. We have the state of New Jersey represented by an African American in the Senate and a Latino graduate of the MSP program in the United States Senate representing the state of New Jersey. When we talk about profound change, we need only examine the institutions that service our lives in this state to see how important and how impactful the MSP program has been. So yes, I know that there are struggles ahead, and I will devote the remainder of my life in attempting to address them. But am I optimistic that change will eventually occur, and do I think that this program will be a part of it? Absolutely. And I'm very confident that that will happen.